They were teenagers flying wooden planes, held together by fabric and prayers. The German pilots laughed at them, called their aircraft toys, antiques, flying coffins. But what happened next would shock the entire German army and change the course of World War II forever. Stay until the end of this story to discover how these young women became the most feared pilots on the Eastern Front. And if you appreciate true stories of courage and sacrifice, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our next incredible story.
This is the story of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. Young women, most of them still teenagers, who flew antiquated biplanes into hell every single night, who dropped over 23,000 tons of bombs on German targets, who completed more combat missions than almost any other unit in the Soviet Air Force. But here's a question that still divides opinions today. Should women be allowed in combat? Can they handle the physical and psychological demands of war? Or are there some roles that should remain exclusively male? The NightWitches answered these questions in the most definitive way possible, with bombs, courage, and blood. They weren't supposed to succeed. They weren't even supposed to survive, but they did both. And in doing so, they changed warfare forever. June 22nd, 1941. Germany invaded the Soviet Union with the largest military force ever assembled. Over 3 million soldiers, thousands of tanks, thousands of aircraft. The blitzkrieg that had conquered most of Europe now turned east. The Soviet forces were decimated. Entire armies were destroyed in weeks. Cities fell. Millions died. The Germans pushed deeper and deeper into Soviet territory, unstoppable, merciless, crushing everything in their path.
The Soviet state called every able-bodied man to fight. Factories were converted to weapons production. Cities became fortresses. The entire nation mobilized for total war. But women? Women were told to stay home, to work in factories, to serve as nurses, to support the war effort from behind the lines. That wasn't enough for thousands of young Soviet women who had grown up in a system that promised them equality, who had been taught to fly planes through youth programs similar to the Scouts, who had studied physics, mathematics, astronomy, chemistry at universities, who were just as capable as any man.
They had skills, they had training, they had courage. What they didn't have was permission. So they wrote letters, hundreds of them, all addressed to the same person, Marina Raskova. Raskova was already a legend. In 1938, she had helped set the world record for longest non-stop flight by women, flying over 6,000 kilometers across the Soviet Union. During that flight, her plane encountered severe weather. She had to parachute out before the emergency landing, then spent 10 days alone in the Siberian wilderness, without food, barely any water, searching for her crew. She survived, wrote a book about it, became a national hero. She was the first woman in the Soviet Union to earn a professional pilot's license. She was famous. She was respected. And most importantly, she had the ear of Joseph Stalin himself. When the letters from young women pilots started arriving, begging for a chance to fight for their country, Raskova knew what she had to do. She went to Stalin, made her case. These women were trained. They were ready. They were desperate to serve. Give them a chance. Stalin, surprisingly, agreed. Marina Raskova was authorized to form 3 all-female aviation regiments: the 586th Fighter Regiment, the 587th Bomber Regiment, and the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. The Soviet Union became the first nation in history to officially allow women in combat aviation. But approval from Stalin didn't mean approval from everyone else. The young women who volunteered, most of them between 17 and 25 years old, arrived at training camp expecting to be welcomed as patriots. Instead, they were met with mockery, skepticism, outright hostility. The male pilots laughed at them. The mechanics refused to take them seriously.
The military brass assigned them the worst equipment available. They were given Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes, ancient aircraft designed in 1928 as crop dusters and training planes. Made of plywood and canvas, no armor, no guns, no radio, no parachutes. The cockpit was open to the elements, meaning the pilots flew exposed to temperatures that could drop to -40 degrees Celsius. Maximum speed, 150 kilometers per hour. Maximum bomb load, 350 kilograms. Maximum altitude, barely 3,000 meters.
But the women of the 588th didn't quit. They adapted. They innovated. They turned their weaknesses into weapons. Their planes were too slow to outrun German fighters, too fragile to survive anti-aircraft fire, too primitive to carry sophisticated targeting equipment. So, they became ghosts. They flew only at night. They approached their targets at low altitude, barely skimming above the treetops. And then, just before reaching the drop zone, they did something that seemed insane.
They turned off their engines. The planes would glide silently through the darkness, the only sound, the wind whistling through the canvas wings. The navigators would light a flare to see the target. The pilot would hold the plane steady despite the blinding searchlights and tracer fire. The navigator would drop the bombs. Then they would restart the engine and disappear back into the night. It was terrifying, suicidal, brilliant. The Germans had never encountered anything like it. They would hear nothing, see nothing. Then suddenly, bombs would fall from the sky. By the time they scrambled to respond, the NightWitches were already gone.
The German soldiers started spreading rumors about these mysterious attackers. They said the Soviets had sent witches to curse them, that the sound of the wind in the canvas wings was like broomsticks sweeping through the air. The name stuck, the NightWitches. But the women of the 588th called themselves something else. Sisters, comrades, pilots. And they flew, night after night, mission after mission, sometimes 15 sorties in a single night, more than any male regiment, more than anyone thought possible.
They didn't stop between flights to smoke or rest. As soon as they landed, ground crews would refuel and rearm their planes in minutes using an innovative assembly line system developed by their commander, Yevdokia Bershanskaya. 10 minutes from landing to takeoff, then back into the sky. Their mission wasn't to cause massive destruction. Their little planes couldn't carry enough bombs for that. Their mission was psychological warfare, harassment, disruption. Keep the Germans awake all night, exhaust them, make them afraid of the darkness, make them understand that there was no safe place, no rest, no escape. And it worked.
The German soldiers came to dread the nights. They knew the witches were coming. They just didn't know when or where. The psychological toll was enormous. Men who had conquered most of Europe were now terrified of teenage girls in wooden planes. But the cost was brutal. The Po-2s had no armor. When they were hit, they burned, fast. The canvas and wood would ignite like a matchbox, giving the crew seconds to escape. Many didn't make it. One night, Yevdokia Nosa and her navigator Yekaterina Ryabova were hit by anti-aircraft fire. Their plane caught fire instantly. They had no parachutes. They had no chance. They crashed into German-occupied territory and died in the flames.
Another night, Lydia Litviak, one of the regiment's most decorated pilots, disappeared during a mission over Orel. Her plane was never found. She was 21 years old. Tatiana Makarova, Vera Belik, Rufina Gasheva, Natalia Maklin. The list of dead and missing grew longer every month. By the end of the war, 30 of the NightWitches had been killed in action. But they kept flying, because they believed in what they were fighting for, because their country needed them, because they refused to let fear stop them.
And slowly, the mockery turned to respect. The male pilots who had laughed at them now called them sisters. The infantry soldiers
called them celestial creatures. Even the Germans, who had dismissed them as amateurs, came to fear and respect them as some of the most dangerous pilots on the Eastern Front. But respect didn't erase the psychological toll. Flying into combat night after night, watching friends die, knowing that any mission could be your last, it broke something inside many of them. Irina Rakobolskaya later described the guilt that haunted her, the guilt of surviving when so many others didn't, the guilt of giving orders that sent young women to their deaths, the guilt of celebrating victories that were built on the bodies of friends.
She remembered one night in particular. A young pilot, barely 19 years old, had returned from a mission, shaking so badly she could barely climb out of the cockpit. She had been caught in searchlights and almost shot down. She was terrified. She begged not to be sent up again that night. Rakobolskaya had to make a choice: send her back up and risk losing her, or let her rest and potentially fall short of their mission quota. She sent her back up. The girl died 2 hours later when her plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire and exploded in midair. That guilt never left her. Even decades later, even after all the medals and recognition, that guilt remained.
But there was something else too. Pride, purpose, the knowledge that what they did mattered, that they had proven something important, not just about women, but about humanity itself. That courage isn't about being fearless, it's about being terrified and doing it anyway. That strength isn't about being the biggest or the fastest or the best equipped, it's about making the most of what you have. That heroism isn't about glory or recognition, it's about showing up night after night and doing what needs to be done, even when no one is watching, even when you might not survive to see the dawn.
By the time the war ended in 1945, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment had flown over 24,000 combat missions. They had dropped over 23,000 tons of bombs on German targets. They had helped liberate dozens of cities. They had lost 30 pilots and countless aircraft. In recognition of their extraordinary service, the regiment was given Guard status and renamed the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment. They received the Order of the Red Banner. 23 of the NightWitches were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor in the country. But the recognition came with a bitter irony. After the war ended, after they had proven themselves in combat again and again, after they had sacrificed so much, the Soviet military went back to excluding women from combat roles.
The NightWitches were disbanded. The women were sent home. They were told to return to normal life, to get married, to have children, to forget about flying. Many of them never flew again, not because they didn't want to, but because they weren't allowed to. The doors that had briefly opened during the war slammed shut again. Some of them struggled to adjust to civilian life. How do you go back to being ordinary after you've been extraordinary? How do you settle for a quiet existence when you've lived on the edge of death every night for years?
Nadezhda Popova, one of the most decorated NightWitches, flew 852 combat missions during the war. After it ended, she became a flight instructor. She spent the rest of her life teaching others to fly, passing on the skills and courage that had defined her youth. In an interview late in her life, she was asked what she wanted people to remember about the NightWitches. She thought for a long moment before answering. "We were just girls," that's what she said. "We were just girls who wanted to serve our country. We weren't trying to prove anything about women or feminism or equality. We just wanted to fight for our homes, our families, our future."
But she also said something else, something that captured the essence of what the NightWitches represented. We learned that fear is a choice. We were terrified every single night, but we chose to keep flying anyway. Because some things are more important than fear. Some things are worth risking everything for.
Today, decades after the last Night Witch flew her final mission, their story endures. Museums display their photographs. Historians write about their missions. Artists create paintings and sculptures in their honor.
But perhaps the most powerful tribute came from an unexpected source. In 2013, the German government erected a memorial in Berlin to commemorate all Soviet soldiers who fought against Nazi Germany. Among the names carved into that memorial are those of the NightWitches, the same women the Germans once mocked and feared, the same women they called witches, now honored in the heart of Germany's capital as heroes who helped defeat fascism. Because in the end, that's what they were. Not witches, not propaganda tools, not symbols. They were heroes, young women who faced impossible odds with inadequate equipment and overcame both through skill, courage, and an unbreakable will to survive.
They proved that gender doesn't determine courage, that youth doesn't mean weakness, that the size of your weapon matters less than the size of your heart. They showed the world what women could do when given the chance, and they did it while flying wooden planes through hell, night after night, mission after mission, until the war was won. The Germans were right about one thing. There was something supernatural about the Night Witches. Not magic, not witchcraft. It was something more powerful than that. It was the strength of the human spirit, the refusal to give up even when everything says you should, the ability to turn weakness into strength and fear into fuel.
That's the real legacy of the 588 Night Bomber Regiment. Not the bombs they dropped, or the missions they flew, or the medals they earned. It's the reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't made of metal or explosives. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply the courage to keep going when everyone expects you to fail. The Night Witches didn't just fight a war. They fought an entire world that said they couldn't. And they won both.